Coming up on Choppers Politics.
My select committee has launched an entire inquiry into the cultures that underpin male violence against women. And let me tell you, those cultures start in schools, they perpetuate in the workplace, and that's exactly what we see in Parliament, a culture where it is okay to belittle and demean women.
So it comes from the top?
I think so.
It's been an odd week in Westminster. With local elections looming on the horizon, it would normally be the week where all parties are making their pitches for why they should be your choice at the polls on Thursday next week. And later on in this episode, I'll be talking about just that with Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and Labour's shadow levelling up secretary, Lisa Nandy. But instead, this week, a different topic has dominated conversation in Westminster. Yes, sexism in Westminster is back on the agenda. First, after the Mail on Sunday published claims from Tory MPs that Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner had tried to put off Boris Johnson by crossing and uncrossing her legs during Prime Minister's questions on the Labour front bench. And then, a few days later, it emerged that a Tory MP had been accused of watching pornography in the Commons chamber by a colleague. The claims were made at a meeting on Tuesday night where female Conservative MPs shared accounts of alleged sexism and harassment. And someone who was at that meeting was Tory MP Caroline Nokes, who chairs the Women and Equalities Committee. Now, since our interview with Caroline, the Tory MP in question has been named as Neil Parish, who represents Tiverton and Honiton, and he has had the whip removed. Caroline Nokes, welcome to Choppers Politics in the rather fetid dungeon here in the Red Lion pub.
Smells a bit, doesn't it?
It does a bit. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you on, and it's a perfect week to have you on because some big things are being played out in Parliament which are deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people. Were you there in this 2022 meeting this week when it emerged, when it was claimed that a colleague of yours, an MP, had watched pornography on the government benches?
Yeah, I was there, and the 2022 is an opportunity for Conservative women in Parliament, not just MPs but peers as well, to get together, have a chat about some of the issues that we're facing. Normally really wide-ranging. It'll be policy, it'll be personal, it'll be practical. And whatever evening it was this week, what was it, Tuesday night, we had the Chief Whip, we had the Leader of the House, and we had the Chairman of the party to talk about how you can retain female MPs, because loads of us are conscious, and I think it was the chairman of the party that referenced it. The female MPs tend to serve one fewer term than their male counterparts. We tend to be in more marginal seats, so therefore find it harder to win. But in 2019, we saw way too many good, experienced, clever, brilliant colleagues who, for one reason or another, chose to end their careers probably at the absolute prime of them.
And yes, and that's why it was set up. And it was an hour-long meeting, and then there was a Q&A, wasn't there?
It's usually an hour-long meeting. I think it ran over a bit. Was there a Q&A? Well, it turned into a chance for us to have a very frank conversation with the Chief, with the Chairman of the party, fewer questions to the Leader of the House, and people talking about what they were worried about, what they were concerned about.
And one of your colleagues said what?
One of my colleagues indicated that she had seen a male MP in the chamber watching pornography on his mobile phone.
Now, was that a WhatsApp message that may have been opened from a very rude and dodgy friend, or was it watching pornography for a period of time?
She was very clear that she had seen him watching pornography. She didn't specify a time period. She just made it clear that she had seen him watching pornography. I would have liked to have seen the Chief take immediate action on being told the name. I would have preferred to have seen somebody have had the whip withdrawn immediately, because it was corroborated. It was corroborated by a second witness. Although I think, in all fairness, I don't know the detail. I don't know whether the second witness was watching the same incident, the same person as the first person indicated. But if that was the case, and I assume both of them went to the Chief and gave the name, if that was the same name and they could identify it was the same time, then you've got instant corroboration. Why should we even have to have a situation where a colleague doesn't understand that it's unacceptable to watch pornography in the chamber of the House of Commons?
It is bizarre, because that place is a courtroom. It's a court, isn't it? You know, it's the Queen's Palace. I mean, it seems disrespectful on multiple levels. to anybody.
Many levels.
And to colleagues too.
And to colleagues.
Let alone a Queen.
And I think there was a colleague present the other evening who said words to the effect of, if that happened in any other workplace, if you were sat in in an office and your colleague was watching pornography on a neighbouring computer, that would be an instant disciplinary action. They'd be on gardening leave by that afternoon.
Have you ever seen anything like that before? MPs behaving like this before?
No,
the House, or...
I have never seen a colleague watching pornography in the House of Commons.
No.
I would have spoken up had I done so.
Yes. I mean, do you have faith in the process which Chris Heaton-Harris has referred it to? I mean,
no, I don't.
It sounds like long grass to me, or the way you're describing it.
And I think the challenge is the length of time that it's taking to address complaints through that scheme. I think there is still a huge measure of reluctance from individuals to come forward and report to that. I think it's a very challenging process. And certainly the Women and Equalities Select Committee, when we did our report into a gender-sensitive parliament, we highlighted the fact that there are still significant concerns about the grievance scheme. So, look, I think we'd all acknowledge that these schemes evolve over time. They need to be honed, perfected. I think in the case of that scheme, it needs to be sharpened up. It needs to be much quicker, because it's just unacceptable to have these cases hanging over.
There are dozens now, aren't there?
Well,
involving cabinet ministers.
If you believe the Sunday Times, there are 56 separate MPs who've had complaints raised against them, and I think to have that many outstanding seems an enormous number, and it doesn't work either for the person making the complaint if it drags on, and it doesn't work for the individual who has a complaint hanging over them. You could have a malicious complaint hanging over you for months and months and months, and no resolution brought. So look, I think it needs to be quicker.
Well, what was the reaction of the party's high command when you raised this? Chris Heaton-Harris was there, Mark Spencer, the leader of the House, the party chairman, Oliver Dowden. I think Theresa May was in the room. Yeah,
I mean, Theresa was certainly at the meeting. I assume she was still in the room at that point, although she did leave early. Look, I think the chief, the leader of the House, the chairman of the party, they all looked appalled, horrified. Rightly so.
So it's been taken seriously, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think, look, we still have a far too blokey culture in the House of Commons. There is no doubt about that. And that is prevalent on both sides of the House. And we have to address that. And part of it, and I always tell people this, and I'm completely candid, it's a lot better than it was in 2010 when I arrived. We're 12 years on. The gender balance is better. But there is still an atmosphere, an air of female colleagues being tolerated rather than celebrated for the undoubted assets that they are to both our parliamentary party, to Parliament as a whole. I still look at it, and we have too few women in cabinet. We have literally two Conservative female select committee chairs. And I want to see us kind of professionalise the way we help people with their careers. It's really obvious, isn't it, that we don't have very many women on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We don't have very many women on the Defence Select Committee. We have to do better at working out what the skills, and I can't speak for the whips of other parties, I will speak for the whips of the Conservative Party, need to be doing a much better job of working out who's good at X, Y, and Z, who's experienced in particular areas, and giving guidance and support on how you can hone your career in a particular direction. And I would always use me as an example. Look, I spent 12 years in local government. I spent 10 years working in the European Parliament. I represent a large rural constituency. I was married to a farmer, for goodness sake. And yet nobody has ever thought Nokes might know something about Europe, might know something about local government. I've never been allowed anywhere near, what was MHCLG, DCLG before that, and now is the Department for Levelling Up. Nobody's interested in my thoughts on devolution or metro mayors. Nobody has ever asked. We had that massive horse meat scandal back in, it was about 2012. I am the only person in the House of Commons who has ever issued a horse passport. I ran an organisation that was a passport issuing organisation.
Is that on you as MPs not to push yourself forward? No offence. Or is it because the whips aren't reading your CV closely and saying, well, Caroline knows all about that, let's put her into that position?
At that time, I went to see David Heath, who was the minister, and I said, David, I can talk to you about equine databases. I can talk to you about horse passports. I can talk to you about phenylbutazone, the drug that you're all worried about. And he went, oh, thank you. Never heard from him again. And I take the view that when it comes to reshuffles, when it comes to appointing PPSs, when it comes to working out which junior minister might be best placed where, then there needs to be much more strategy go into that. And I also think in the select committee process, we need to be thinking about who is good and solid and knowledgeable in areas. Now, it's an election now rather than appointed by the whip, so that makes it much more of a lottery. But I just think there's very little done to help people identify what they think their career path
Do women hold back more than men? Is that part of the problem?
I think it is part of the problem. I think certainly when I looked at the select committee elections, very few women put themselves forward for election in the first place, and that's problematic. And there is and it was Kay Burley who taught me this 12 years ago, is that when she's looking for somebody to interview to go on her programme, she'll ask a whole range of male MPs, and their first question will be, when? Can I make this in my diary? She asks women MPs and they say, what's it about? So the men will go on, if they can find a diary slot, to talk about any subject under the sun. The female MPs are much more inclined to only talk on the issues that we know about. I know which one I'd rather have on my show.
Yes, quite. Now, you said there's a problem in both the Labour and the Tory party. What's your worst experience been as an MP, female MP, along these grounds, this kind of sexism that your colleagues have put up with? What's your worst experience?
Too many to mention. There have been incidents that I've reported to the whips, MPs inappropriately touching me. One, I can remember being bullied by one. I mean, God, who's going to try and bully me? But it was when I was relatively inexperienced and I was a PPS, and they said to me, well, the problem is with you that your office is so disorganised that they're not supporting you properly, and you aren't assertive enough to get in there and tell them how to run your office. And I wandered back to my office and I said to my staff, I said, have you ever spoken to X? And they looked at me and said, no. And I said, has he ever called here? No. Has he ever sent an email to you guys? No. Has he ever been to this office? And they all looked at me and said, no, he's never been here. What are you talking about? I thought, he's just told me that you lot are disorganised. Yeah. I felt it was just done to belittle and demean me. And when that was the same person who had fondled my arm in the library in a particularly unpleasant fashion. But horrible things have happened to me, really horrible things. Touching, staring, bullying, trashing my reputation. I can think of a colleague who always refers to me by a particularly unpleasant nickname, and nobody calls it out. Nobody says, hang on a mo, you really should not.
Male colleague.
A male colleague calls me something violent. I know he does it to members of the press as well. And when I mentioned that in the meeting the other night, I instantly got a text message from a mate of mine. He said, I know exactly who that is. And
do you want to say what it is now?
No, because it's too horrible.
Don't say it.
It's really horrible.
It's a kind of playground culture, isn't it? Or is it locker room culture?
Yes, I think it's a bit of both. I always say that the House of Commons is like a boys' prep school. The inmates haven't quite got to 13.
With a school bell, of course.
Yeah, with a school bell, with wood panelling. Some of them find themselves perfectly at home there. But it is also a locker room culture. I
don't know what the examples are. I mean, calling it out might tackle it, you see.
And I think that's why I spoke out last year when I did the Beth Rigby programme with Jess Phillips and Rosanna and Faye Jones, is that actually one of the problems is that we're afraid to call it out. Female colleagues are worried what the repercussions will be on their career if they speak out. And that's
You'll be a troublesome woman, won't you, then?
Absolutely. And people often said to me, why did you leave it 18 years before you ever referenced anything about Stanley Johnson? And I said, because it would have been easier to get rid of me than to get rid of him.
No, that was he
smacked me on the backside and said, Romsey, you've got a lovely seat, whack.
I know. It's appalling.
People say to me, it was after I was selected to be the candidate for Romsey. He was the candidate for a seat somewhere in Devon. It was at Blackpool, so whatever year.
So you were 30 years old, you were...
Yeah, 2003, I think it was.
A grown-up person.
I was a grown-up person, but I was still being demeaned and belittled. And people say to me, you were sexually assaulted. I mean, look, he smacked me on the backside, but to me that wasn't about sexual assault. That was about belittling and demeaning a woman.
Has he talked to you since you raised this?
No, he, it was very clear at the time. He didn't know who I was. He didn't remember the incident. One questions whether that's because he did it so often. And, it was Rachel Johnson that reminded me of it. I did her podcast that week, and as we finished it, she said, Romsey, what a lovely seat. And I just looked at her in horror and went, God, this is a family joke to talk about people's seats in that way. Awful.
And Boris Johnson hasn't raised it with you? Or?
Boris Johnson doesn't speak to me.
Doesn't he?
No.
Why not? You should talk to one of his MPs.
Well, and I also think that there is a real challenge around why would the party hierarchy, why would the party chairman not want to address some of the issues that perhaps the most high-profile female MP that they have is continually raising about cultures in Westminster. For goodness sake, my select committee has launched an entire inquiry into the cultures that underpin male violence against women. And let me tell you, those cultures start in schools, they perpetuate in the workplace, and that's exactly what we see in Parliament, a culture where it is okay to belittle and demean women.
So it comes from the top?
I think so.
I mean, that's shocking. I mean, he's got female PPSs who he can raise it with him, can't they? Or
well, I don't know what that relationship is like. I really don't. I think what is really important is that we as a Conservative Party have a real challenge with female voters. We also, and I'm very clear about this, as society, as we go into a cost of living crisis, it will be women that notice that first. Yeah. It is women that bore the brunt of the pandemic working in insecure, low-paid employment. It was women who were most likely to be in those sectors which were shut down first and shut down for longest. And I think what we as a party have to be doing is focusing on how can we put in place practical female-friendly policies.
I've got to raise the issue of Angela Rayner with you.
Oh, yeah.
She wore trousers yesterday to Prime Minister's questions. We know that was obviously a statement because of the issue of her crossing her legs or not crossing her legs. What's your take on this the idea of this basic instinct row? I mean, it's like not something from the last century, isn't it?
It is, and there was a general discussion I was having with somebody yesterday about when did that film come out?
Was it 92?
Not even in my child's lifetime. Look, do I think that Angela has ever gone into the chamber and sought to distract the Prime Minister by crossing and uncrossing her legs? No. Do I think that that was an article that the Mail on Sunday should ever have run? No, I don't. I really don't. Even if Angela did make a joke about that on the terrace, and there seem to be plenty of colleagues who've come forward to say that she did make a joke about it on the terrace.
I think she was saying almost, look what they're saying about me, joke.
Yeah, and in
inverted commas.
The challenge that we have, the way women in politics are reported is appalling. I've been on the receiving end of it from the Mail on Sunday. They ran a photograph of me in 2010, which had been taken 8 years previously. So it was a really old photo. And I was sat on a high stool wearing a skirt, and you could see straight up my skirt and the tops of what were hold-ups, not stockings, for the record. And it was a photo that I would argue was specifically chosen to portray me in a certain light. And I found it humiliating at the time. I look back at it now and I really laugh, and I think it's an absolutely amazing photo. And I looked stunning in it, but perhaps you might expect that when I was about 30. But I have a real concern that still in 2022, women are being reported for how they look and men are being reported for what they say. And that, I think, is the state of political journalism in some sections of the media, not all, and I'm very keen to emphasise that. And it worries me because it puts us off. And I was speaking to a constituent back on Saturday, local election time. We're out knocking doors every weekend, and a voter said to me, there aren't enough women for me to choose from. And I was explaining to her that it's really hard to find women who are prepared to stand at every level. So whether it's your local council or whether it's for Parliament, there is still a challenge that for every 3 male applicants, there'll only be 1 female one. And we are put off. As I said, in 2019, a whole bunch of really great women left. And I think some of the reporting that we heard from the 2022 earlier this week was that lots of female MPs in that room were considering standing down.
Right?
Well, so no, I think there's been some reporting that lots of them were saying that. I didn't hear that. Maybe I wasn't paying adequate attention. Maybe I was sat there shell-shocked from the early revelation.
It started with Angela Rayner. She wore trousers yesterday. Do you wear trousers more because you don't want to have these comments?
When I go shopping for clothes that I wear in the chamber, I will always try something on and sit down in it. I don't think many men, when trying on a suit, sit down in it. And I do that to check. The benches are hideously uncomfortable. and they're a funny angle and they're quite low. And so I always do that to check how high will this skirt dress ride up when I'm sitting down. What looks perfectly respectably knee length when you're stood up, suddenly you've got 3 acres of thigh on view. I will dress according to what I'm doing that day. So if I'm doing a media interview where I know I'm going to be sat on a sofa, I will try to wear trousers. If I'm going to be in the chamber, I will, there will be some dresses I'll go, ooh, not that one today. That'll be too short. But it's just wrong, I think, to comment in exactly the same way people were commenting about Angela. We saw the same similar comments, derogatory comments about Tracy Brabin, who wore a dress which slipped off her shoulder a bit. We have seen horrific images taken from the press gallery down at the Prime Minister when it was Theresa May, commenting on her cleavage. The same for Jackie Smith when she was Home Secretary all those years ago. I think there was a headline that accompanied that one of Breastminster. And you only have to go back to 2017 to see that photograph on the front page of the Mail of Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister, Theresa May as Prime Minister, and the caption was Legsit. And this is what puts...
These are all reporting you're describing there. Do you think that there should be some comeback for journalists for doing that? Do you think that this reporter should lose their pass at the Mail on Sunday? Where are you on the issue?
I called for Glenn Owen's pass to be taken off him. I wrote to the Speaker and I highlighted to the Speaker those examples that I've just mentioned to you. And I said, I think at the very least the Mail on Sunday should be invited in to explain themselves. And that article...
And that led to him calling the meeting, was it?
Which I don't think they turned up to, did they? And so, look, I think there is an important conversation to be had about how that sort of reporting, and it's not just the sheer placement of the article, it's the captions that go alongside it, it's the pictures that are chosen. We saw a picture of Angela taken on the This Morning sofa, where again, arguably her legs were the most prominent feature in that, and in it she was wearing a perfectly respectable length skirt. I think it's just really uncomfortable that there is this decision to repeatedly use imagery, use captions. It gave them an excuse to run the full Sharon Stone picture. And to me, that feels as if sections of the media are determined to undermine her credibility as a female
parliamentarian. There is sanction, though. There is sanction. We have to go through IPSA libel laws. The ultimate sanction is don't buy the paper, don't read the paper. But you go towards freedom of the press and you lose the argument, I think, for what you're saying. Don't you think that?
I think that the Mail on Sunday should have been invited in to explain themselves. I never expected the pass to be taken off Glenn Owen. I think Glenn Owen needs to have a long, hard chat with himself about whether what he did was responsible, and the editorial process, and whoever the pictures editor was. And if you look at the Mail on Sunday, that's a great long list of men will have made those decisions. How about they have a bit of gender balance in their editorial team?
Have you talked to Angie Rayner about what happened to her?
I haven't seen Angela since, and so I haven't spoken to her. I did copy her in on my letter to the Speaker saying, you need to have the Mail on Sunday in for a chat.
And has the Speaker replied to you yet?
No, he hasn't, but he's probably been a bit busy.
Yes.
That was only Sunday that I emailed it to him.
Well, what do you want men to do about this in the House of Commons? They should call it out, shouldn't they?
I want my male colleagues to call it out when they hear it. I want my female colleagues to be brave enough to report it. I want female staffers to report it. I also think there is a massive problem culturally in that place, not just with harassment and abuse of women, but young men as well.
Being harassed themselves?
Yeah, absolutely.
By who?
By older men working in and around Parliament.
So are these gay men?
Yeah, and I would point at one particular incident, which is that we know one of my colleagues now without the whip, Rob Roberts, harassed both a male and a female member of staff. And when that was reported, there was an enormous amount of sympathy and outpouring of support for the female staffer. And yet the male staffer, it merited barely a line in anybody's consideration. Now, look, I think we need to be alive to the fact that sexual harassment, workplace intimidation and bullying, whilst it is gendered, whilst it does happen predominantly to women, it can also happen to young men. And I think we need to make sure that the reporting mechanisms, the support mechanisms are there for everyone.
Is it unusually bad in Parliament, do you think? This kind of harassment of men and women?
So I think it's really hard for me to judge whether it's worse in Parliament than it is elsewhere. Certainly over the course of the last few months, I've talked to a lot of women working in the media who have told me that they have experienced similar things. Interestingly, a lot of women working in the city have told me how vastly improved it is there and has been there over the last couple of decades.
So we can learn from there. You mentioned they're calling it out. I mean, Boris Johnson did tweet straight away, wrote to Angie Rayner on a Sunday, said not in my name, all that kind of thing.
Yes, he did. I don't know whether he means that or not. I hope he does. I hope that the Prime Minister is making progress in that respect, shall we say. But my view is that actually the Prime Minister's public statements on this have been very powerful.
I mean, the Tory party does say it's the party of women, makes these points, having 2 female prime ministers and Labour's has 0 and all this kind of thing. But it appears to be a cultural issue.
And I don't think it's a cultural issue that's exclusive to the Tory party. I think if you look at the trade union movement, which certainly has a massive influence on the Labour Party, women within trade unions will sometimes raise their concerns with me. I think we saw the horrific abuse targeted at female Jewish MPs in Labour in the run-up to the last election. People like Luciana Berger, that is somebody who should still be in Parliament. Ruth Smith, she was not given the support that she needed. And I do feel that it was the women who bore the brunt of that. And are we seen as easy targets? I don't know. I think there is a cultural thing that it'll be easier, notionally easier, to try and bully a woman out of a job than a man. Now, it doesn't work with someone like me. That just makes me much more obstinate. And certainly I can remember the case of Ali Goldsworthy in the Liberal Democrats and her leaving that party. Look, I think there is something about politics that attracts a certain type of particularly macho, willy-waving man. I think it is a profession where people who are assertive and domineering are attracted to it, and I think that causes challenges. But I don't think it's an exclusively Conservative problem, and I'm absolutely conscious that sexual harassment and bullying happens in way too many workplaces still. We should, however, be leading by example.
Well, Caroline Nokes, the chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, thank you for joining us in the Red Line Pub today, and let's hope this interview changes things.
I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Caroline Nokes there. Well, listeners, I realise that's a difficult topic, but I'd be really interested in what you think of what Caroline had to say. Please email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or tweet us. We're at Choppers Podcast. Right, do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be speaking to Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey and Labour's Lisa Nandy about the upcoming local elections. Right after this.
If you're finding this podcast interesting, you may also like our new daily podcast, Ukraine, the Latest. Every weekday, the Telegraph's leading journalists bring you the latest news and the most informed analysis of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. From our newsroom in London and from the ground.
The Russian machine has been ground to a halt now for well over a week, and that is just staggering.
NATO has to act now. It has to do more than it's currently doing. Otherwise, in this Ukrainian MP's words, you'll have to evacuate the whole continent.
One video that we found to be incorrect was bomb squads seen in the Donbass region. The metadata of this clip shows that it was created in 2019, not today.
Search Ukraine, the Latest, in the same place you're listening to this, and click follow so you don't miss an update.
Now, turning our eyes to next week's local elections, the Liberal Democrats have seen their numbers severely depleted since they lost power in 2015. But recent by-election results have had the Tories slightly on edge about whether Sir Ed Davey's party could be a threat in some southern Tory heartland seats. So I thought it was high time I met up with the Lib Dem leader in his office in Portcullis House in the Houses of Parliament. And I started by asking him what success might look like for the party in next week's local elections.
I think we're going to go forward in many parts of the country. We're building on the success of the by-elections last year, where in true blue Buckinghamshire, Cheshire and Amersham, we, I think, surprised everybody by winning that by-election. And then we went further, and in North Shropshire, in a seat the Conservatives had held for 200 years, we won that seat as well. So that's given us a bit of a spring in our step. And whether it's blue wall seats or indeed seats in rural communities across places in Wales, places in Scotland, we think we can make make progress. I'm not going to put a number on it, because one of our criticisms of the Conservative government and some Conservative councils is they've been taking people for granted, and that's what we've heard from a lot of lifelong Conservative voters. So we're not going to take the votes for granted. We're going to keep working till close of polls.
Davey, I know you like Twitter, but why should someone vote Lib Dem? Go on, say it in a tweet.
If you want a local champion for your communities and a fight for a fair deal for you, your family and your community, vote Liberal Democrat. Where our strength is in community politics, where we are from the community, work with the community, by the community, and listen to their issues. And that is one reason where the government is going wrong, in my view, and where a number of Conservative councils appear to be going wrong. They've forgotten that they need to reflect their community, not their partisan interest. And where we've done that really well, Liberal Democrats have got really well dug in. And, going back to the parliamentary by-elections, when we were in North Shropshire, for example, we actually didn't know what was going to be the big issue there, but we went and talked to people and we let them tell their story. And the story in North Shropshire was of ambulance waiting times. I mean, it was really weird. About every other door was saying either they, their relative, their neighbour, their friend had to wait hours for an ambulance to take them to hospital, and they were pretty upset and distressed and a bit angry about that, and so we said, well, okay, we examined it. It turned out that a lot of community ambulance stations have been closed, that the West Midlands ambulance service wasn't really being run very well, and so we exposed that, and that got us into a big debate about the NHS, and people felt that we were responding to the issues that matter to them and their family.
I saw the leaflets up there, and of course the Tories were damaged by having a candidate from Birmingham, which, if you're from North Shropshire, Birmingham is a long way away. It might as well be the moon, It may have looked near on the map, but if you're local in North Shropshire, Birmingham is not where people come from.
Well, you reinforced my point about community. I think people want to know that the person they're voting for knows their community and is from their community and understands it not in a sort of superficial way, but feels it. They live the experiences of the
That really
voters.
matters. You're pushing police station closures, aren't you, at the moment in your campaign?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Is that a similar issue you're finding across the country?
Yeah, I think since 2015 there's been over 200 police stations and counters closed. It's bigger in different areas, so Thames Valley have got a really bad situation there in Buckinghamshire, Berkshire and Oxfordshire, and so we're really focusing in on that. It's not just, however, station and counter closures, it's actually police numbers and community visible police. Boris Johnson promised 20,000 police officers. He's fallen behind. He's nowhere near on track for that. I think people are noticing that. They're noticing a rise in antisocial behaviour. That's really coming up on the doorstep. A lot of crimes going unsolved, rise in serious crime. And we've had figures out today, a rise in domestic violence, really quite worrying. So on the doorsteps, crime is coming up in quite a few
And that's
areas.
the lived experience, isn't it, of people?
Yeah, that's right. And we're putting forward ideas. We're saying, for example, get rid of police and crime commissioners. They cost 50 million quid, and really what are they offering? Put that money on the front line. And we also think it's about community police officers. It's also about youth services. And we think money should be ring-fenced for local authorities so they are working with young people.
How have you improved the Lib Dems since that difficult time in 2019 when the party had quite a drubbing at the polls?
I think in two ways. First of all, focusing in on what matters to people, what matters to communities, and really listening. I think when I took over, I said I wanted to listen to people, and I've actually gone and done that. I talked to a lot of people, and cost of living, of course, really come to the fore in the last 6 months or more. People really worry about tax rises. I've been, not shocked to be honest, but I've been disappointed by how many people feel that the tax rises are just beyond the pale. I mean, the Tory government has really hurt people when they needed help. And it's not just individual households paying the national insurance rise or the higher income tax through freezing the thresholds. It's businesses as well. So a lot of traditional Conservatives have felt let down at a time when their heating bills are going up, their food bills are going up, their motoring costs are going up. They feel it's not the right time for the government to be shoving up taxes.
And you're targeting annoyed Tory voters, are you, or disaffected Labour voters? Where's your base going to come from? Where are you growing?
Well, we're appealing to all voters.
That's always the frustration, I suppose, from the two main parties.
I mean, to give you an example, we've said that there should be a tax cut, a large tax cut in VAT of 2.5%. That's worth an average £600 to families, and that would help everybody. And I think the cost of living crisis is across the board. And while we do have some target proposals for pensioners and the least well off, I think this is a crisis, emergency, which is affecting everybody, and we need solutions that are going to help everybody.
And you're targeting rural Tories too, aren't you? Which is interesting.
Well, rural communities. I was in Powys the other day, in Mid Wales, in the Highland Islands in Scotland. I was in West Oxfordshire recently. And what people were saying is it's all very well the government talking about electricity and gas bills. We think they should be doing more, by the way, but the government's focused on that. They've forgotten the 1.5 million people living in rural communities who survive on heating oil. Heating oil is unregulated, there's no price cap on it. And it's actually a lifeline for people in rural communities.
Not just Argos, it's also...
I think sometimes people forget there's a lot of poverty in rural communities, a lot of poverty, and people on very low incomes who are doing, working hard, looking after families, caring for their families, playing by the rules, and they feel excluded, they feel forgotten, they feel taken for granted. And so we've said, look, there should be a similar approach to that approach that's being adopted for electricity and gas bills. It seems fair. It should be a price cap, and above that price, the government should come in.
No, I'm not sure clear why it's not part of the price cap, but I mean...
Well, because it's not at the moment. Heating oil and LPG are not regulated by Ofgem, and the government have just left them out. And Conservatives, I think, people used to think that they spoke for rural communities, for farmers and villages and so on. The fact that they've not done anything for this has left quite a few people quite angry and isolated. And Liberal Democrats are saying, look, in all fairness, this needs to be tackled.
Do you look back now on your involvement in the coalition as a party as a mistake?
No, because it was in the country's interest. Yes, my party paid a price for that, but I think Liberal Democrats played an important part when the country was in a crisis. But I also think we did some really positive stuff on things like renewable energy. And I'm very proud that Liberal Democrats nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable energy, made us a world leader.
When it was hard to sell?
It was hard to sell. I mean,
Tories fought it.
Well, the current Prime Minister was writing in the Daily Telegraph that a wind turbine couldn't take the skin off a rice pudding when I was fighting for it. So I know he's now Johnny-come-lately. He's now saying, is it
welcome all the sinners who repent.
Yeah, of course I do. Although I wish they'd do a lot more.
Yeah.
Britain should be a world leader. We were a world leader under the Liberal Democrats. We're falling behind now because the Conservatives are not taking this further forward. And I think Ukraine and Putin's wicked invasion shows why I think we were right, because why I wanted to invest in other sources of energy like renewables wasn't just because of climate change, important though that is, but also our energy independence, our energy security.
So it wasn't a mistake, it was important because you felt that it wouldn't have worked having a minority government or whatever, the uncertainty of that. You gave certainty, but you got slightly swallowed by the Tory monster.
Well, I mean,
in that coalition.
Listen, I'm proud of taking millions of people out of a tax.
Well,
it was the Liberal Democrats' policy on tax cuts.
That was Danny's honest policy.
Yeah, and Liberal Democrats did that. And actually, if you remember, Mr. Cameron said it couldn't be done. Well, we did it. And so we have a track record, right, on this. I think some people think, we're more to the left on the economy. If you look at our record, we've talked about cutting taxes for low paid. We're proposing a tax cut now. We believe in free enterprise, free trade. And I think sometimes if you want a party that believes in free trade and competition, you shouldn't be looking at the Conservatives, you should be looking at the Liberal Democrats.
Now, you're less of a man than when we first met. You're slimmer. What's happened?
Well, lost some weight. Listen, you get to a point in your life when you think, I really need to do something, because I had put on quite a bit of weight.
How heavy were you? I'll tell you my weight.
Okay.
I was 16 stone during the lockdown.
I was more than that.
More than that, yeah. And you're about my height, you're about 5'11".
Yeah, 5'11", spot on. Knew I needed to lose weight. I mean, a big reason is my kids. I've got to be honest with you. I've got a little girl who's 8. I want to be around. I want to be healthy for her because she's the light of my life, as you can imagine. So is my son. And my son in particular, he is severely disabled. He needs 24/7 care. And my day starts by getting him up at 6 a.m. in the morning. And, you begin to notice he's now 14 and he's going to get older and he's going to get bigger and he's going to get heavier and get stronger. And I'm probably going to get weaker and older and more fragile. So the fitter I can be, the longer I can be, the longer I can be fitter, the better it is for John and his care. And so that is a massive motivation.
But was COVID the fear of being a bit overweight and then succumbing to COVID was what drove this weight loss?
Yeah, well, I started thinking about my health during COVID, as lots of people did. But what I did, though, I started running. And I did the NHS app Couch to 5K. I don't know if you've heard of it. The problem was I did it and I really enjoyed it, but I hadn't lost any weight and I was putting too much strain on my knees. And so I hurt my knee. And that sort of made me think, you know what, Ed? Actually, fitness is great, but you've got to lose the weight. Yeah. And so I became a bit of a rabbit for a while.
So what did you cut down? You used, how did you?
I get rid of the carbs.
No, carbs gone?
Carbs gone.
What are they, potatoes?
Potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, all that stuff.
Just gone?
Gone totally. So's dairy.
No dairy?
No dairy, no meat. That was tough. It's tough. I'm still keeping strict. I eat vegetables, fruit, fish, and I'm careful on different things. I was 0 alcohol for 2 months. I have to be confessed to you that was quite tough. So I have the odd glass now. That keeps me going.
Gosh, that's quite a dramatic regimen they're going, isn't it? Yeah.
I feel so much better.
Do you? New suits?
Yeah. My suits were falling off me.
I know.
This is a new suit I've got.
Looks great. Yeah. I mean, it's quite a dramatic weight loss. And what do you miss the most?
Well,
bacon sandwich, no meat.
I'm a bit of a bacon sarnie. I do like a bacon sarnie.
Not like Ed Miliband. You eat it privately.
Yeah, eat it privately. I do like my roast beef and Yorkshire pud. I've tended to eat meat for most of my life. I mean, there's a period when I didn't, but most of my life I've eaten meat, and I'm not giving it up. I mean, I think I just eat a lot less meat, to be honest. Yeah. A lot less meat. My wife is basically a fish-eating vegetarian.
So classic Lib Dem, then.
Well, she's doing it for health reasons, I know, okay. But she's a Lib Dem.
Are you a vegan?
Well, I'm not going to be a vegan permanently. I'm behaving like a vegan now.
It's just eating less stuff, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Exercising as well, because now I've lost the weight, exercise is really much easier. So I've bought myself a rowing machine, I'm going swimming a bit more, and I'm doing things like not taking the lift and walking up the stairs, watching my step count, basic things.
What's next, a marathon for you?
Hold on a minute. Maybe Tim Farron is ahead of me. I've got to make sure my knees will fully recover. But listen, I want to lose more, and hopefully I can. I think when I got elected, I was 14 stone. So I'm now slightly less heavy than I was when I got married, which is a great start, a great thing. But I want to be slightly less heavy than I was when I got elected.
So sub 14 stone by the time you enter government, David.
Yeah.
Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, thanks for talking to us today on
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Davey there. Now, if we're doing a tour of the main political parties in today's episode, that means our next stop is Labour. Lisa Nandy is the Labour MP for Wigan. She's also the Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up. She has been in the news this week over suggestions she's uncomfortable about her party leader Sir Keir Starmer trying to pressure the Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the Partygate affair, when people are battling the very real consequences of a cost of living crisis. So I thought I'd give her a call for her thoughts on next week's local elections. And of course, Partygate. Lisa Nandy, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, welcome again to Choppers Politics. How are you?
I'm good. I'm wearing out my trainers at the moment, knocking on doors across the country.
Absolutely. And we're coming to you in Wigan, of course, levelling up land, as Michael Gove might say. Have you been to Wigan yet? Has he responded to your invitation?
He has, actually. He came a few weeks ago, met with my local college principal and a few others to see some of the work that we're doing here, and also hear about why we need far more support from the government if we're going to make this a success.
Did you meet him, or was it a guerrilla tactic by him?
No, it was it's a straightforward offer. In the end, this shouldn't be party political. It's important for the next general election, but it's important for the country. And I want there to be a consensus that investing in places that have seen decades of decline is what any responsible government would make a priority.
You sound more positive about levelling up than when we last spoke, when we discussed the Roman references in that enormous document. Are you coming round a bit more to what he's trying to do?
I mean, I was never opposed to what he was trying to do. The problem is that he's the only one trying to do it. So that paper was, very clearly not backed by the Treasury. It's why the analysis was so big and then the answers were so small. And since then, I think what we've seen pretty clearly is that Number 10 has sided with the Treasury and pretty killed off any chance of having a really sort of transformational approach to this while they're in office. I mean, goodness knows who's going to be the Prime Minister by the time we get past the local elections. I have no idea. But as long as Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are in charge, I think there's no real prospect of this happening. But for me, that makes it even more important that we step forward and convince the country that we can do this.
It's things like bus services, isn't it? I saw the FT putting a piece about the 40-year decline in bus services on its front pages this week. I thought it was really important. I think bus services, for example, is a classic thing which I don't think Westminster ever really understands, and trains have a hard enough time attracting investment, but buses is even worse, isn't it? But that's one of the key areas, I think, which you can get easy wins on levelling up, which the government seems to not really grasp.
I mean, I think it's not just that we have completely ignored what is happening to most people in the country, obsessing about trains when the vast majority of people travel on buses, and those services have fallen apart over the last decade. But I think the bigger issue actually is that when people do try to raise those things, they're mocked for them. Do you remember Jeremy Corbyn at PMQs years ago raising buses, and the outrage from some political commentators and journalists, not you, but some, mocking him, saying, my goodness, what is this, transport questions? How could you possibly be raising bus services? But to people across this country, this is a difference between whether you can take up an apprenticeship or not. This is whether you can get home on time to read your kids a bedtime story. This is, the fabric of our communities that has been falling apart.
I think I should have a pause there. For the first time I heard a Labour frontbencher talk about Jeremy Corbyn in a good way since he stood down as leader. But that's good. Yeah, we were totally right. I remember the reaction to those questions, and it was appalling, I thought, and completely misjudged. But in terms of what people do care about, of course, there's been lots of talk about Partygate, and you've said recently that Partygate isn't really where normal people are, people out there worrying about the cost of living crisis. That's the case, right?
No, I think there are some people in this country who care very, very passionately about Partygate, and they're right to do so for two reasons. One is that there are lots of people who lost loved ones and didn't say goodbye in the pandemic. And, it breaks my heart to read some of the letters that have been coming into my office about it. One woman who lost a dad, he was alone in hospital, he was confused. None of them were there because they respected the rules. And she wrote to me and said, I feel like a fool for doing this now when the Prime Minister was doing what he was doing. So there's no question that Partygate matters, and it matters that you have a Prime Minister who not only breaks his own rules when he expects us to obey them, but also that he just won't tell the truth about it. Because if you can't trust him on this, you can't really trust him on anything. That doesn't distract from the fact that for the vast majority of people in this country at the moment, there is a crisis that is engulfing families and businesses. People literally don't know how they're going to keep their heads above water, how they're going to afford the weekly shop, how they're going to pay their energy bill, how they're going to meet their mortgage payments. And this is affecting people that actually have been largely protected from some of that in recent decades, who are now really, really feeling the pinch. There was a bit of sort of gossiping in Westminster this week saying that Keir and I had fallen out about this, but you can see that this is what we really, really focus on at the moment. We called for an emergency budget over the weekend. We've been out all week trying to raise issues about rising petrol prices and the need to get a windfall tax on the oil and gas producers. And the reason that we're doing it is because things really are falling apart for most families in this country. And that's why I've been so critical of levelling up as well, because it really is just a nonsense to have cabinet ministers walking around talking about a Medici-style renaissance when people haven't got money to spend on the high streets and in local businesses, and everything is falling apart.
Where is Labour at the moment in the polls? It's doing very well in London, as you might expect, but do you think it's not doing well enough outside of the capital? Is that to do with Keir Starmer's leadership? Is it a bit lacklustre? There's been some focus group work done on that recently, which says that Keir is a nice bloke, a decent man, but he's not cutting through.
I think there's a reason that any opposition party all over the world has struggled over the last few years, and that's the pandemic. People have been so focused with day-to-day survival that politics really has taken a back seat. And I understand that because my own family and my community has been no exception to that. We've just been trying to keep going. I think actually, reflecting on the last 12 years that I've been in Parliament, I think we are in a much stronger position than we've been at any point over that decade. We've got a candidate for Prime Minister that people believe could be Prime Minister. They like him, they're open to him. I think it's absolutely right to acknowledge that they want to hear more from us. But to be honest with you, that is why I'm in this job, because Keir and I are absolutely determined that what people will hear from us is not just an opposition to this Tory government, but a genuine alternative that they can get behind, that they understand their own place in it and their community's place, and puts people back at the centre of that. That's why I was so keen to move in the reshuffle, and over the next few months you'll hear a lot more from me on that.
Just back to next Thursday, well, what does success look like for Labour? I've seen forecasts of 800 seat gains across England and Wales. Is that a good result? Is that what you're expecting?
I mean, I don't think we'll see huge dramatic changes next week, partly for fairly boring reasons, that the way in which the seats that are up for grabs have fallen this time round means that there isn't huge scope for massive changes. The Conservatives, when these seats were last up, did really badly, and how far they can fall, I'm not sure. I think there is huge discontent, though, around the country. That's what I've been picking up in every nation and region. I've been in Scotland, I've been in Wales, I've been up and down England, and I've just picked up so much frustration at the status quo. People really do, they want things to start to improve and they want it to start happening quickly. I'd say yes, but it's far more about things like town centres that have been taken over by drugs gangs, lack of police resources, so that it feels that very little is being done about that. Those are the sort of bread and butter issues that you'd expect in a local election, but really are at the forefront of people's minds at the moment.
You mentioned Partygate there, and I was in Wandsworth this week, and I was really stunned actually by the reaction from Conservative voters about Partygate and about the way Boris Johnson has dealt with that and what it means about his own integrity. I won't bother asking you what you think of Boris Johnson, but isn't it in Labour's interest that Boris Johnson hangs on as leader? I mean, he's a vote winner for Labour at the moment.
I don't think it's in the country's interest, and I don't think you can possibly make that argument as a political party that is seeking to govern this country in order to improve it. I also think that this is doing real damage to the whole of politics. I think the anger is largely directed at the Conservative Party, but I think you look at some of the stuff that they've been doing this week, just trying to, these briefings about Angela Rayner and in politics. You look at some of the stuff that's going on in the House of Commons that, MPs like Caroline Nokes have talked about so compellingly. It's just, people look at it and think this is rotten to the core. And we've got to win back people's trust so that we can clean this up and sort this out. And Boris Johnson makes that so much harder for all of us. It makes it harder for the country. I really want him to go.
How do you find being a woman in Parliament?
I have always found it pretty difficult to talk about this because I don't want to put women off coming into Parliament, because I've seen the benefit that there is of more women there, not least that when I've had to put up with absolute sexist rubbish, it's been women of all political parties who've come forward and been really supportive. I remember as a new MP making a speech once about UK export finance and sitting down and a journalist taking an image of my top that I was wearing, putting it into a national newspaper, putting it around on Twitter, and having to put up with every national newspaper and a lot of male MPs talking about my breasts for several weeks. And I remember it was Sarah Tether, who was the Lib Dem MP, who was the first person to say to me, don't let the so-and-sos get you down, in slightly more choice language than that. and lots of women MPs coming forward and saying this is absolutely disgraceful.
And it's still going on, that. MP watching pornography in the House of Commons, unbelievably, this week.
The thing that I was thinking about this week when what happened to Ange is that, this sort of stuff I just take on the chin now, which is maybe even worse. I mean, that you fight it, you stand up to it, but it's not unusual to expect it. I think the bigger issue actually is for those newer MPs who've come in, who are cutting their teeth, who are finding their voice. And I think a lot of this is deliberate. I think it's deliberately to tell women to know your place and pipe down. It's no accident to me that I was voicing my own opinions and I was making a fairly radical argument in the House of Commons when this happened to me. It was, it's a way of silencing women and trying to keep us quiet. And the great thing about Angela Rayner and Caroline Nokes and lots of other women is that they just simply won't put up with it anymore. And that's been a step change since I've been in Parliament. We are not going to put up with this anymore.
Did you have faith in this grievance system? There's dozens of complaints gone in, and it might take months to resolve. I mean, do you think there needs to be more firm action more quickly?
I think it's right to have an independent process and to be able to deal with this in a way that is swift and fair, not least because there are going to be people who put in malicious complaints. It happens in politics in every arena. So we've got to make sure that it's swift and fair and those decisions can be upheld. I think I'm more worried about the situation of staff members in Westminster than I am of MPs, because I think the repercussions for them of making a complaint are so much bigger, and the reasons why you would not do that are so much more present. And I don't think we've done enough to support staff. I think we need to do far, far more. And
Westminster appears to attract this behaviour, doesn't it?
I think it's the culture. I think there's a sort of arrogance amongst some MPs. I mean, I have to say to you, most MPs are not like this. And well, because you know a lot of us, but there are more of us that are normal human beings than you would imagine from this sort of debate. But there is a sort of arrogance and a sense of entitlement amongst some male MPs. I think you find it everywhere, but if I'm really honest, you find it much, much more on the Conservative side. I think just because you've got people who are used to being privileged and you get a lot more of them. That's not to say that anyone who is wealthy and privileged therefore decides to watch porn in the House of Commons and go around groping women. But I think there's a sort of sense of protecting the powerful and a sense of entitlement. And it's one of the reasons why I've been so dismayed watching what Boris Johnson is doing to politics, because I think that he perpetuates that culture and makes it harder for us to deal with some of the problems that arise in the House of Commons.
I mean, he would say he tweeted in favour of Angela Rayner on Sunday. He wrote to her saying, "This is not in my name, these conversations." I mean, he's doing everything he can.
I mean, he was right to say it, and it's welcome that he said it. But he's no stranger to sexist comments and derogatory comments about women himself. And I just think when you look at some of the decisions to reinstate the whip to Tory MPs have been being investigated for sexual misconduct because it's politically expedient. I think these things are just so damaging.
Yeah. Now, Lisa Nandy, this is just you and me talking and no one's listening. You did run for leader, didn't you, all those years ago, several years ago? Do you still want to be leader, given the state of politics at the moment? Could you do a better job than Keir Starmer?
I want to be the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, and I genuinely mean this. I ran to be leader.
You're such a politician.
No, but you know what? The thing is that I've been an MP for 12 years now, and every single day of that, I've walked around those division lobbies, voted and lost. I've had a front row seat to the devastation that has been wreaked on my community and many, many others. I'm in politics to change it. I think it was Karl Marx who said the point is to change it. And I am determined that before I go off to retire, I am going to be in a position with Keir and with the team to actually change this for people. That's the promise I made to the people of Wigan the day I was elected as a fresh-faced, recently turned 30-year-old. And somehow I am going to make sure that we do this and that we deliver on that promise.
Lisa Nandy, Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up, thank you for joining us today on Shoppers Politics. Great to have you on, and all the best. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, that's all for this week, listeners. If you enjoyed this show, please do leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find this show. And you can also hear my daily thoughts about politics in my daily Choppers Politics newsletter. It delivers daily insights and political gossip straight into your email inbox every weekday. And the link to sign up to that is in the show notes to this episode. And be sure to check out my weekly Peterborough Diary column every Friday evening at 7 p.m. on the Telegraph's website and in Saturday's newspaper. Thank you to my guests this week, Caroline Nokes, Sir Ed Davey, and of course Lisa Nandy. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wells, Giles Gear, and Theodora Luludis. And as ever, thank you to you for listening. And finally, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. I know you won't regret it. Until next time though, cheerio!